Welcome to Moving the Needle on Wicked Problems, our podcast. Today, we are continuing our mini series on racism in Canada. We want to deep dive into how racism affects our lives, and we are looking at diversity in various aspects of life in Canada. And for this episode, we will be looking at racism and diversity in politics, and in particular, how we experience it on Parliament Hill in Ottawa. In June 2020, the Senate of Canada held two historic debates on racism. Senators from across the country and around the chamber talked about the scourge that is racism and how it impacts Canadian society. We heard from senators who experienced racism in their home communities, but shockingly, their experience with racism on Parliament Hill as well, even after they became senators. For many, this was a shocking revelation about the intrinsic and deep nature of racism and how, despite reaching one of the highest offices in the country, it can still impact them.
Definitely, Senator. That was an illuminating and scary discussion at the same time. No matter your position in society, racism isn't far behind. Now, we're coming up to close to 2-year anniversary of those debates. Where basically everyone stood up and said, rightfully, we must do better. We need to do better, and we need to stamp out racism. But, there's a lot of questions of where are we as an institution? Where is the political society and politicians on questions of racism? And where is society in general, going to go from here to deal with this issue? So we're going to look at, has there been progress made, and where are some rays of light that we can use to improve? So this is a big topic with a lot of facets. Let's dive in and get to the interview.
So today we are incredibly privileged to be joined by three of my esteemed colleagues in the Senate, the Honourable Senator Yvonne, the Honourable Senator Rosemary Moodie, and the Honourable Senator Salma Ataullahjan, to help us further our understanding of racism in Canadian society. And today we are going to obviously focus a little bit more on racism on the Hill, on Parliament Hill, in Ottawa, in politics, and that particular part of our society that is significantly important in all our conversations. So I'm going to start off with a simple question to each one of you, and it's a personal question. And the question is about, how did racism affect your life personally before you became a senator? I mean, what impact did it leave? How did you feel? So we have three senators, and I'm going to start with Senator Boyer, who we all know has been an advocate for years for Indigenous peoples. And so I think lead us off, Senator.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator Omidvar, and it's a pleasure to be here today with my esteemed colleagues as well. And I'm happy to share this story. It's something that certainly has pivoted me into my professional career and formed part of who I am today. So when I was a little girl, I lived with my aunt. I lived with my Aunt Lucy, and my dad, being the youngest out of 14 children, was a Cree Chippewa family that came from northern United States. And my aunt spent 10 years in a tuberculosis sanatorium. She went in when she was 14 and she came out when she was 24. So my bedtime stories with her were stories of what it was like to be a little brown girl in a big institution. She saw her family once in those 10 years, and that's because the family was so far away and she was institutionalized. She was in a body cast for 5 of those years. And she talked to me about the monsters that walk the halls. And she talked to me about what it was like when your family isn't watching over you, how brown kids are treated different than white kids, and generally racism within the institution. And this was in the 20s and 30s. And so when I grew up, and I became a nurse before I was a lawyer, and when I was nursing, I saw what she had talked to me about many years before, and it became a driving force in how my professional career was developed, because it was the racism that I was seeing within the healthcare system. And the reason that people would talk to me as if I was one of them, and they would say, with the way the Indian problem will be solved is if you sterilize all those Indian women. And people said that to me on more than one occasion because they thought I was like them because of the color of my skin. And it made me very angry, and it possessed me to a point where I started taking night classes, and I thought if I had a law degree, I could do something. I could get some tools, and I could try to stop this. And that was the beginning of how my professional career was developed as a lawyer, as a nurse, and as a lawyer. And my ancestors still sit with me, and my aunt's voice is with me at all times. So that's my story.
Thank you so much, Senator, for sharing that journey, which started in a negative place, and we hope will end in positive results. Let's go to Senator Moodie.
Thank you also for having me here today, and it's really my honor to be part of this group as well. I tell a slightly different story. I grew up in a Caribbean island, where there are a number of people of mixed race. In fact, everybody is of mixed race around you. Many individuals who look like me, people who achieved success looked like me. I saw myself in my leaders. And so I grew up in a place that was, I would have to say, perhaps less of an issue from a racism point of view. Stratification in that setting was more about class and more about colonialism. I really first met open racism when I came to North America. And it is, it took its forms in terms of daily events, interactions, some of them major, some of them minor aggressions like people staring, following you in stores, that kind of thing. That is, a lot of people have that experience. The microaggression, where are you from? What is your background? Was almost daily, and my children lived it too. And that was something that really became a part of my experience once I stepped into North America when I moved here. And then there were some more outright aggressions, people screaming at drivers, screaming at us, go back to where you came from. Neighbors who actually asked my kids, told my kids that one day, go back to where you came from. As a young doctor, I'm thinking I probably struggled more with gender issues, not being a man, than race, but it was wrapped in there for sure, a bit subtler. As a more senior level, there was no question that the governance level and the leadership level, I was often the only person looking like me there in the room. And I would hear protestations, people protesting and saying, but no, this board doesn't need diversity. We are not bad. We are good people. We are people of faith. We are not racist. And that was a common theme that you heard. And you had to then bring people along with the idea of why it was important to open up an institution, a governance body such as the ones we were sitting in, to a more open approach. So for me, it is a life journey. For all of us, it is. We wear our skin. We can't hide who we are. And nor should we try to, nor should we have to.
Precisely. Senator Ataullahjan.
Thank you, Senator Umedwar.
And before we should congratulate Senator Ataullahjan yet again for the incredible honor she has received from her country of origin, Pakistan, the star of Pakistan, I believe, certainly the star of one of the many stars in our Senate. So over to you.
Thank you, Senator Umedwar, for those really, really kind words. I mean, to be recognized by Pakistan and by my colleagues, I'm really touched and humbled. And I'm delighted to be here with Senator Boyer and Senator Moodie. I mean, we work on many issues together. So for me, my experience was also slightly different. I came to Canada when I got married. I grew up in a very privileged family. Went to the best school in Pakistan for girls. It was a boarding school. So I think growing up there, you don't even really think of racism. I mean, the issues that we talk about now weren't discussed then. But however, being an ethnic Pushtun, sometimes you would get some jokes because we're warriors, and we're very simple people. Yes, no. And if we stand with you, we stand with you. So they would be very sometimes at the butt of Pushtun jokes, but those we kind of knew how to handle that. So when I came to Canada, I think the first shock I got was the building where we were in. The supervisor, he asked me, he said, "Where are you from?" And I said, "From Pakistan." He said, "Oh, why are you not black?" I was really taken aback by that, because I had, those of us who travel, who see the world, you realize that there's many races, many ethnicities, and all over the world. And I was really taken aback, and I had to take some time and explain to him and say, listen, there's all kinds of people in Pakistan. I have my own family, this, you see all color of skin and all color of eyes and all color of hair. It's there, and it's sometimes like Rosemary said, it's subtle, sometimes it's outright. It wasn't too bad for me in the sense that people were judging me by the color of my skin. I was very, very surprised. I was very surprised by that. And I didn't realize that just the color of your skin plays such an important part. Of course, the name Ataullahjan, then they would sort of, oh, you're Armenian, of course. I mean, things have changed a lot since then. It's, if anything, it's gotten a little bit worse because of my religion. Because being Muslim, our world changed drastically. And I remember having conversations with some young French, men, and they were saying, "But why do you want to kill me?" And I said, "Oh my God, why on earth would I want to kill you?" So and the other thing that happened with the Muslim community is that collective grief that and collective guilt that we feel every time something happened. And I would say, oh my, I hope it's not a Muslim. I hope it's not a Muslim who's done this stupid thing or who's done this horrible thing. And, and people have to apologize. And it was my two daughters who said to me, says, "We don't need to apologize. We haven't done anything wrong." How many other people apologize when someone from their religion does something? And that made me change the way I think about these things. Racism is there. People think you can't, maybe even with a name like Ataullahjan, can't speak English properly. And sometimes I joke and I say, listen, when you speak to me, you have to speak really slowly. Sometimes they get it, sometimes they don't get it. So we all have, burdens to bear, and we continue to fight. And by growing up, never knew racism existed. Coming to North America, it changes your perception of the world.
Thank you. Burdens to bear and strategies to embrace. Moving forward from the past, I'm going to focus our attention on the very near present, very near past, 3 or 4 weeks ago, the demonstrations in Ottawa, the expressions of hate on our streets in Ottawa, flags with swastikas, Confederate flags, and flags that represent other hate groups. And this was just a month ago in the Canada that we know to be, sort of a, generally speaking, polite, cohesive, inclusive society. And my question is to Senator Moodie. What did that expression of outright racism on Parliament Hill in Ottawa, what does that mean? What does that tell us about our country?
Thank you, Senator Oumedvar. Let me start by saying that, just expressing what is obvious, is that not everyone in the crowd that day, for those weeks, was a racist or a bigot. Certainly, we noticed that the organizers and the original, shall we say, group embraced a number of other causes, people who were there for other reasons. And it is notable that people felt comfortable exhibiting these hateful symbols and thoughts and values in public. Having said that, I believe that the expression of racism in that demonstration, in that occupation, is really a symptom, a recurring symptom of a disease that is ever present, that over the years may have been buried somewhat, but it's a reminder that these feelings, these beliefs, this hatred, bigotry, still really does exist, even when it may have gone underground, so to speak. It may have appeared to become more quiet, more dormant. Unfortunately, we cannot yet say, despite the work that we have done individually and collectively, that hatred is no longer a common language. In fact, it is these events certainly prove that these feelings are alive and well. And that's what it meant for me.
Okay. It was a timely reminder that we should not get so comfortable believing a myth of Canada as being cast in a certain way. Senator Boyer, you're an expert on this, given your background. There's been a lot of talk about systemic racism. There are politicians, institutional leaders, and pundits who say there is no such thing. In our chamber, it was actually stated there is no such thing as systemic racism. Do you think it is important to have a definition of systemic racism? Or do you think we should leave it to evolve? Because systems are complex and systems evolve in different ways. What are you more comfortable with?
Thank you, Senator Omadvar. It's difficult because right at this particular time, I'm immersed in the systemic racism within the healthcare system. And when we look at institutions, we can define what it is, but that will be like a living tree. It'll keep moving and evolving. And I would hate to see it get stuck on one definition and then having a very particular view of what that one narrow definition is, because I think it changes as we've just seen by Senator Moodie's response to what was happening downtown. That takes it to a whole other level. So we've got evolving things that are going on at all the time, but I think it's really important that it is named, that we have to name it, and we have to say, yes, that is racism, and you have to speak up. And if you don't speak up, then your silence is acquiescence in the legal world. So you have an obligation to speak up and say, stop that. Stop it. That hurt.
True.
And here's why.
So, Senator Ataullahjan, one of the things with your background as running as a candidate for elected politics, obviously is a little bit different than becoming a senator and the process that goes about it. We often hear that every political party, maybe except for one, the PPC, but every political party wants to increase diversity in their candidates. They want to, have a more diverse caucus when they move forward. But then we've also heard that it's not that easy for people of color or BIPOC individuals to get into elected politics, to be a politician, to run in elections. Any thoughts on what you faced when you ran, and also just how we can break down some of these barriers in politics?
Thank you, Paul. So when I ran, which was in 2008, We didn't really, as a Muslim woman, when I came out and said I was running, I didn't get like some people in my community were very, very happy, but some, they didn't like the idea. You know, I mean, here we are in Canada, even how a Muslim woman coming out of the home. And I remember I always quote this one gentleman walked up to me and said, well, you know what, when you learn how to drive, you start off with a small car and then you move up and then you start driving a big truck and you're jumping into the big league right away. And it was the community, while a lot of them were very supportive, very happy, there were some who weren't happy. But where I really had a big issue, and I'll probably get into trouble with when I say this, but these are conversations that we need to have. We need to take a look at ourselves, you know, as a community, and see where we're not supporting our people is. I remember going to a mosque in Mississauga and we wanted to give our flyers and the men all refused to take my flyer. And then I saw the candidate from the other party who was running, you know, in the riding next to me come, who was a Caucasian woman. And they literally went up to her and were almost hugging her and stroking her arm. And these were the same men who refused to take my flyer because as a Muslim woman, they didn't think it was appropriate for me to think of stepping outside of the home. And some of my volunteers wanted to go and fight. And I said, no, that's the one thing is, you know, when you get into politics, you have to control what you say. You have to cross your T's and dot your I's very, very carefully. But, you know, when I became the senator, and a lot of those people who didn't support me were the people that I reached out to in the beginning. And I'm very happy to say that currently we have a lot of women, you know, who have been elected to parliament, and there's a lot of young people, older people who think of politics now, who want to get into politics because they do see the possibilities. Because the one thing that I did do was the first few years, I was at every community event talking about the importance of being involved politically and making space for yourself. So I'm happy to see that that's been done. But there's also, you know, having the conversation that you have to have a really thick skin. You know, because people will come at you, and more so, it's very difficult in the Western world being a Muslim. It's very, very difficult. And I know some of our children struggle too.
Now, Senator, you just had mentioned how when you first became a senator, that you reached out to communities and were discussing getting people active in politics. And so I'm wondering, you know, I'm thinking back to June 2020. If I have the month correct, when we had the emergency debate in the Senate on racism. We also had a committee of the whole with ministers there. You know, what was shocking to many people in there, that we heard actual stories from senators that they have faced racism since they became a senator, not only from the public, but even on Parliament Hill. You know, I'll throw this to Senator Moodie if you want, but maybe others can jump in. Have you experienced or any expressions of racism since you became a senator, not only in the public but actually on Parliament Hill?
So yes, I have a classic example for you. That day in December of 2018, when I first turned up to East Block entrance to the Senate, to the meeting that had been pre-organized for me to be onboarded, to complete that process of onboarding, I was met at the door by the PPS at the entrance and told quite unceremoniously that I had to wait outside. It was December, it was cold, and it was uncovered. I explained who I was and why I was there, and I explained that there were folks from this office coming to meet me. I gave them the information they needed to make the contact, to double check. And I waited 15 minutes. I was kept outside. I wasn't allowed to enter. I reapproached them 3 times and said, can I at least enter? In the meantime, the pages who were there to meet me were standing inside the door, wondering where I was. Why had I not turned up? I was being held outside in the elements, if you will, by 2 gentlemen who didn't make any moves to contact any offices that I could see, were chatting with each other and were obstructive every time I approached them. On the third time that I approached them, the door was open and the pages who were standing inside happened to hear my name. Because I said, yet again, I'm Senator Moodie, I'm here for a meeting, and they heard that. And they stepped forward. There was no way for me to connect with them because I was physically being held outside. And I can only assume that this occurred because I looked different, frankly. In their view, I did not belong. And so I was held outside. There are other ways for them to have dealt with me that they could have applied. And I really worry about the average BIPOC Canadian who does not wear a pin or doesn't carry that ID turning up at the Senate door. How are they going to be treated? Because if I, turning up, declaring myself a senator, was treated in this way, how will they be treated?
So if I can jump right in, it's interesting, Senator Moodie, because my experience was that it took almost 6 months, for the protective services to recognize me. Every time I walked up to center block, they would say, "Can we help you?" And I used to say, "Well, I'm a senator," and I remember coming down once out of the elevator, and in center block there used to be this computer where they could do research, and as I'm coming out, I see my face on that screen. So obviously somebody had been researching me. It was quite common that when we went to caucus meetings in center block on the House side, for the guards to say, "Excuse me, who are you?" And so I got so used to it, I'd just flash my Senate card at them. But I'd see others who didn't look like me just walk in without question being asked. But yet I had to almost, on a regular basis prove my identity. And I think it happened recently too, when I was in one of the buildings and my staff was with me, and she was very surprised that they didn't recognize me. I had to walk up to them and show them my card. That it's me, because, and like you, I was actually told, "Oh, you don't look like a senator." And I said, "What does a senator look like?" Because I still don't know what a senator is supposed to look at. And I always tell them, I said, "Go walk the streets of Canada in the big cities and see, look at the people that you see over there."
I have a little different. Yeah, I have a little different story. I was actually in through the door, and it was my first week in the Senate, and one of the senior executives came into my office, and I was getting set up and things, and we were just having a conversation, and he asked what I did previously to, like last week before I became a senator. And I said I was a professor of law over at Ottawa U, and he was quite curious. He says, "Well, what were you teaching?" I said, "Well, primarily Indigenous law." And he looked at me and he said, "What? Aboriginal people take that?" And what he was doing is he was implying that Indigenous people were not capable or smart enough to be taking law at the university. And it was like the hair on the back of my neck stood up. And okay, I'm now a senator. Can I get into a fight? So that was anyway, that was my welcome into the Senate. Thank you very much. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's always these kinds of experiences, I think, need to be recorded, and I'm really happy you've shared them with us, because narrative, personal narrative and systemic solutions do go hand in hand. So we had, and Paul mentioned this earlier, we had a historic debate in 2020 on racism. And we all participated in it. I believe many senators spoke about it, and it was powerful, and it was emotional, and it was gripping. But can I ask each of you very quickly, what has changed, if anything? Senator Ataullahjan, why don't you go first on that?
I don't think much has changed. The rhetoric was there. It brings to mind, I think it's Shakespeare's quote from one of his plays, life is full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. I think if you even ask some of the people, we had that debate, some might not even remember it. I think it's just, I find what changed for me is that because I worked on so many issues, was so vocal, and I made a point of having conversations with the, all the guards, the protective services that stand there, and just talking to them, and then talking to others, talking about being a senator, talking about some of the work, like having conversations. It kind of, oh, okay, she can speak, she knows what she's talking about. And it's sad that you have to do that. But I think if you ask any of our colleagues if they remember that debate on racism, it's interesting to remember, sort of find out how many of them remember that even. And I think we're still, the same way. Some of us, I know that there's a couple of times when I talk about, some Muslim issues, I know there would be a few rolling of the eyes. I don't have eyes at the back of my head, but I have staff who would see it and tell me. So it's there, and we continue to have conversations, but I think the people that we want to take a look at what is happening, and that to admit that racism exists, sometimes I wonder if they're even interested in those conversations, or whether those conversations are making a difference.
So Senator Moodie and Senator Boyer, do you believe those debates gave you lift in ways that you are engaging? So just to sort of point the question, Senator Moodie, you're engaged in institutional change inside the Senate, and Senator Boyer, you've got your hands full into institutional and systemic racism in the healthcare system. Did that debate, as Senator Ataullahjan has said, that debate was there and she keeps doing what she's doing. But in your case, did it give you a certain lift? I mean, I'm looking for light here. I mean, that has to.
Let me give you some light. So these are my anecdotal impressions. But what I'd say is, I think there has been some movement, not enough, but there has been some movement. One thing I'd say is it's become clearer who our allies are, who are the individuals who are willing to work with us to make a culture shift here. And because I believe the onus of dealing with systemic racism is not just with BIPOC senators or BIPOC Canadians, it's with all Canadians, all senators. And so allies stepping forward and becoming clear to us who we can work with and how we can partner and how we can have these discussions, I think that's happening now. A lot more, certainly in the involvement in the work that I was part of as in the working group on diversity and inclusion and subsequent work and discussions. At the institutional level, I would say that it's my sense there is greater sensitivity around these issues, that senators are maybe talking more freely, more raising these issues in their speeches, in their considerations, perhaps a little bit more. Again, this is anecdotal and this is my judgment system. But I feel that there has been some increased awareness and certainly more dialogue and some momentum to move on a culture shift that I think we are all feeling is necessary in the Senate.
Point of light there. Senator Boyer.
Yes, I tend to agree with both senators. There's been a lot of hand-wringing. I've seen the same thing happen with the whole issue of sterilization. When a report I did in 2017, the government and everybody was hand-wringing and oh so sad, and this has to stop. It can't go on. It can't go on. It's a terrible thing. So 2017, and then where's the action plan? No action plan. We have it again, 2018. We have the same thing in 2019, 2020, and 21, and carries on every year. So, I mean, I think that the debate that we had was a debate. But for me, I like to see an action plan. Let's see something happen. The Senate moves in, and government and the Senate seem to move in geological time periods. I tend to want to go a little quicker. Let's get stuff done. Let's just not talk about it. Okay, that's a great idea. Let's put it into action. How can we do that? Senator Moodie has come up with mentioned a very good all the work that she has spearheaded with the diversity report. We are now working as a subcommittee. There's a good subcommittee on diversity within the Senate. I'm hoping that this is going to be, one more step. It never goes fast enough for me, but one more step in the right direction. So I would say that, yes, Senator Ataullahjan, there's been a lot of hand-wringing and not much done. But on the other hand, there has been slow progressions. And I agree. I have been hearing people being more aware and asking more questions, which is very good. And that shows what, there is an awareness to wanting to make some changes as well, individually, systemically. I think that is difficult, and that we need more action plans, an action plan with a focus on getting a goal done or many goals done.
Right.
Can I just jump in? Just this is it's something a little bit different. Is when I came to the Senate, and you know how sometimes we sit late and they have to provide us dinner, and I found out that sometimes I couldn't eat because there was pork, or ham, and I asked, and nobody had brought this up, but I went to the Black Crowd. I said, listen, you've got people here who do not eat pork and who do not eat ham, and he said, Senator, thank you for telling me that. So sometimes it's good to have these conversations, and I know they're very mindful and they don't serve that anymore. But it's just so many small steps, Senator Umidwar. It's just so many small steps that we take, that we are building on constantly. So change is come in small ways, but again, like Senator Boyer says, not enough.
So I think I'm hearing you all say that incremental change is maybe happening, but we're waiting for that transformational moment. And some of us felt that transformational moment was really in our reach in 2020. But I think, reality has stepped in. And my reality is that our time is fast creeping by. So back over to you, Paul.
Well, thank you, Senator. I just wanted to, sort of touch base a little bit in a question about the changing demographics, I guess, in the Senate and maybe even in the House of Commons. And I just wanted to touch base on one sort of aspect. Often people will say diversity is our strength, right? And that can be applied to corporations or charities or whatever. But and also in the political field. But I guess the question that I have is diversity in and of itself good enough? Is representation good enough? This goes back to maybe Senator Boyer, your sort of talk about, you need action plans, you need sort of action. But, just by changing the demographics that we see, is that good enough to make the lasting change we want? Senator Moodie, if you want to start with that.
Well, I would start by saying that I think it's important somewhat. There's no question that having Minister Ahmed Hussein in the House of Commons, in the government, and some staff at senior levels in the cabinet helped push the landmark policies for Black Canadians in Budget 2021. I'll lay that out there. But does it change fundamental behaviors? Does it enable the shift in culture within and with how we build our policy? I believe that we have larger issues to face that are intersecting with racism, issues on division, national unity, on what it is to be a Canadian, the issue of misinformation, all of these things and a number of other key ones that have emerged with the recent events around the occupation. A number of issues have just bubbled to the surface that are bigger than racism, but all of them intersect with racism. So I think we're going to have to take a pretty wholesome approach, on one that tries to look at and ask these questions to heal the divisions that we're seeing exist right now in our society. So I know that's not the question you asked, but that's where I think we are at. Yes, representation is great, but we have a bigger problem in Canada right now.
Okay. So my last question, although we had so many, but time is running out. And I'm going to be particular about your own connections to your community. I'm talking about, when we're talking about racism, we're talking about anti-Black racism, we're talking about racism against Indigenous peoples, and we're talking about Islamophobia. So from your point of view, if you held all the levers of power, and you hold many, but not all, what is the one change you think this government should undertake to address particular issues of racism that are being experienced by your community? Let's start with Senator Boyer.
I think we have to look at the structure. I think until the structure is changed, then all of the other stuff won't change until the actual structure is changed. And this is something that I've talked about ever since ever, because we have laws and policies, legislation that's based on inherent laws that have come up from the US that were Guardian and Ward theories that created an inequity with Indigenous people, for sure. And Indigenous people were thought not capable of taking care of themselves, so they needed to have a guardian, and they were the wards. But that changed within case law in the 1980s with the Guerin case with the fiduciary obligation. So that didn't catch up with the law. So we have these laws that breed inequity that are the basis for the policies that we're using today. And so that's why you have to go back to the structure, have a look at the structure and see why the structure is allowing these faulty policies to be applied when it's not necessary. So I've been an advocate on looking at the structural legal frameworks and seeing what we can do to tighten that up and make sure that it doesn't reflect unequal treatment between peoples. And I think that would be a good start.
That would be a fabulous start. Senator Moodie, your community, the Black community, has historically faced incredible disadvantages that are rooted in racism, and they continue to feel that, and you've talked about it often. So what's the one thing that you'd like to see the government do?
So it has to do with their approach, mostly. Systemic racism is baked into the way we do things. It's baked into our society. It's baked into the foundations that underpin the society. It's baked into our institutions, our processes. I think that intentionality plays a really important role here. I'd hope that we'd talk about it a little bit more, so I'll talk about it now. I think we need to adopt a new and refreshed approach to inclusivity as a government, as a country, as a society. And I think we need to reach out quite deliberately to bring on board all groups. Yes, you talked about Black Canadians. That's my particular interest, but I'd like to see broader than that. To engage with all groups to get their point of view, to ensure that when we are building policies and when we are planning programs, we are reaching out to these communities to understand how we can best help them and how we can best deliver that help. And not do some of what is fairly typical, well-meaning, lots of money put aside for an entrepreneurial program for Black Canadians. That has a process flaw that makes it inaccessible to most Black people. So we need to be thinking about how we do what we say we want to do as well. And I think that this intentionality really needs to be broader than the government. It needs to be the public sector. It needs to be private sector, corporations. We need to make sure that we embed this goal in all our systems, that we do a refresh that says that we're going to look at how we align ourselves to engage people, to bring them on board, to elevate them, to take away the barriers that previously stood in their way. And some of them are well-meaning barriers. One barrier standing in the way of Black Canadians, frankly, is the laws around language. Many Blacks don't speak French. I'm sure that's the case for many Indigenous folks as well. And so that is a natural barrier that stands in the way of their participation in public sector and government. And that's just one example. We need to be rethinking a number of these system-based, foundational processes and approaches that we have as a country.
Thank you. Senator Ataullahjan, Islamophobia is on the rise. We had a summit, I believe the government had a conference on Islamophobia, but I don't actually know what's being done about it. And so perhaps you could weigh in on what you would like to see done, because it is very much part of our lived reality. Ask Muslims, they'll tell you in 25 different ways how they experience it, and you've talked about it. But what is it that should be done outside beating our chests and, you know, aspirational, performative words?
So let's talk a little bit about the Islamophobia conference. So nothing happened. Let's talk about motion 103. Nothing happened. The Heritage Committee sat and gave recommendations. Nothing happened. Let's talk about the obsession with what some Muslim women wear. There was a total of 30 women who wore the niqab, where you cover your face. And, you know, and I always ask people, why that obsession with what 30 women wore? And why the obsession with women covering their heads? Don't we all cover our heads in winter? And the other thing is that the joke among the Muslim community is that we're all in niqab right now because we're all wearing masks. You know, do we feel threatened every time we see someone in a face mask? You know, we have these discussions where we will talk about what is wrong with this society. We'll have people who will come forward, who will say what is wrong, what they would like to see change, but it's a conversation that will happen that day and it's forgotten. We need, there's many Muslims in politics, and it's what 1.5 million Muslims in Canada, 3% of the population. Yet a lot of them, I'm happy that our youth is having conversations. A lot of the people, the older ones, the first generation who came, do not like to rock the boat, and they will just keep quiet and whatever happens to them. And some of them I know take abuse. It's verbal abuse, and they keep quiet because they feel, oh, it's okay. We need to have, you know, and this was the other thing is when I got into politics, you look for mentors. There were no mentors. People ask me, who was your mentor? Oh, can I have a mentor? No, I didn't have a mentor. I was naive when I got into politics. And you know, I thought I'd be judged by, you know, what I have done. But sometimes you're not. It takes 30 seconds for a person to make their mind up about you, you know, and sometimes it's your name. And it's interesting, Senator Omidwar, that in my younger daughter, who's a lawyer, was having a problem getting an internship. She had to go to South Africa, and a certain senator told me in the Senate, and I was talking to him, and I said, "Listen, if you know," she said, "Well, you know, maybe she should change her name." Oh. And I went to my daughter, and I said, I was told that Ataullahjan, you know, maybe you should shorten it. Or maybe even your first name is unusual. Her name is Shanze. And she said, you know what, mother? I will never want to work with a company that will not accept me for who I am. And I thought, bravo, that's what we need. And I think maybe that's where the change is going to come, because we're used to seeing politicians who, you know, will come out and talk. But when it comes to the time for action, no, we haven't seen. I haven't seen anything change for my community. And I remember as a senator going to Edmonton, and there was where I spoke, and there was a young girl, maybe about 10, 11, a refugee from Somalia who was wearing a hijab, and who walked up to me afterwards and said, you know what, Senator, when I see you, I realize there's room for me in Canada. So change has come about, but we need to make serious change. We need, the most killings in a G7 country for Muslims has happened in Canada. And people are not aware of it. When I even talk to my colleagues, they will say, oh, really? We need that awareness. We need, we need to have these discussions, but then something needs to be done. Don't just ask me to stand up and say, I feel this and this has happened to me and this is happening to my community. No, do something about it. Take some concrete steps. So I feel right now with where Muslims are concerned, oh, it's terrible, but the next day it's forgotten. That family that was killed because they were Muslims. All the politicians went because for them it was a photo opportunity. I did not go. I do not want a photo opportunity. I do not want to use that family. I was in conversations with the uncles and I was in conversations, and even till recently I'm asking, how is that little boy doing? We need to stop using Muslims as props.
Well, what is clear is that we need to have many more of these conversations, and I have kept you beyond the time that you gave me, and I apologize for that, but we could in fact carry on for a very long time. I want to thank you all, and if I'm an optimist, so I detect a note of some optimism, and I think it was in something all of you said, but particularly Senator Ataullahjan when she referred to young people. I believe the conversation that this generation is having is very different from the conversation that the 15, 16, 17, 18-year-olds are having. And for them, race is maybe not such an important construct as it was in our lives. That's my hope. Thank you so much, Senators, for your time. This has been wonderfully insightful. And thank you to our listeners. And I'm sure you have questions. Please send them to us. And better still, you may have subjects you want this podcast to explore. Please write to me on Twitter or my Senate email, and we will be sure to take you up on your ideas. And thank you, colleagues, once again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.